With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, lawmakers want action following the Chevron ruling. We'll explain and have more. But our top story today, farmers voice their frustrations with the EPA at a House Ag hearing. Here's Rusty Halvorson with more.
Agriculture industry officials and farmers telling the House Ag Committee recently they're concerned the EPA has been charting a regulatory path for the industry largely without their input. Chris Chin, director of the Missouri Department of Agriculture, told the committee there's still a need for the EPA to cooperate with states and producers. In particular, Chin said EPA's effort launched in 2021 to improve compliance with the Endangered Species Act has been a sore spot for state regulators who want to work hand in hand with the agency.
Unfortunately, we've seen the EPA fail to include cooperative federalism as it promulgates regulations. Recently, EPA released frameworks for pesticide regulatory decisions to come into compliance with the Endangered Species Act. The agency's failure to engage with co-regulators that are closest to producers is a major factor in those frameworks being unworkable for both pesticide applicators and state enforcement agencies.
In addition, Chin said farmers and states still are waiting for the EPA to make more clarifications about the waters of the U.S. rule after the Sackett versus EPA ruling in the Supreme Court last year.
EPA's 2023 WOTUS rule significantly expanded the jurisdiction of federal government over wetlands and private property. It's been over a year since the Supreme Court's decision in Sackett v. EPA, and state departments of agriculture, farmers, ranchers, and landowners are still waiting on the agency to implement the decision into their WOTUS rule, and most importantly, recognize the critical role of states in regulating non-navigable waters.
Jeff Kipley, vice president of the National Farmers Union and a cattle producer from Aberdeen, South Dakota, echoed those concerns to Representative Jim Costa of California.
We go from one extreme to the other, it seems like, and we don't really land anywhere in the middle. And I think that's where it's going to have to be, get all the parties together and come up with a good plan. That
put them in a room and apply common sense and don't let them leave until we've gotten there, huh?
Yeah.
He told members of the House Ag Committee he'd like to see a better balance when it comes to climate-smart agriculture in the next farm bill as well.
We've been no-till for years. However, some of the current regulations will not allow us to meet everything that's there. We need to open it up so that farms in the northern part of the U.S. can more easily access these benefits. Cover crops just don't work in our part of the world. I'm 26 miles from the North Dakota border, and by the time we get corn out, normally there's snow on the ground. We're always hopeful we have the beans out before the snow hits. So we're limited in some aspects of the current rules, but there are a lot of other things that we can do.
Jeff Kipley of the National Farmers Union. I'm Rusty Halvorson.
U.S. drought coverage is on the rise after reaching a 4-year low last month. Rod Bain reports.
June was a noteworthy month in U.S. drought monitor reporting in that
we reached a 4-year low in U.S. drought coverage. That minimum was achieved on June 11th. At that point, just 11.8% of the country was in drought.
Yet USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says since that point, drought coverage has increased nationwide.
By the time we moved into July 2nd, drought coverage has increased to 18.7% of the country. That's the highest that we've seen since back in mid-March, and that represents a 6.1 percentage point increase from late May and a 6.9 percentage point increase from that minimum on June 11th.
The expanding drought coverage is more impressive, according to Rippey, when factoring in the abnormally dry categories within the drought monitor.
D0 is used for areas going into or coming out of drought. And certainly with all of the flash drought we have seen in the month of June, many of these areas seem to be heading in the direction of drought. So specifically looking at the D0 and the drought areas, if you encompass all of those categories, we have seen a rather dramatic increase from just under 26% of the country back at the minimum on June 4th, all the way up to 47.3% of the country experiencing D0 or drought by July July 2nd.
In terms of where abnormally dry conditions are found in the nation,
The northern high plains, parts of the northwest, portions of the southern plains, and then more broadly, parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt and the southeastern United States, all seeing either the development of abnormal dryness or the return of drought during the month of June.
however, mostly low-end drought coverage is found in the extreme to exceptional drought categories.
If you focus specifically on the D3s and D4s, still very limited across the country, and in fact confined to parts of just 2 states. First, New Mexico, we continue to see some D3 and D4, extreme to exceptional drought. In the southern part of the state, statewide drought coverage is 12.7% on July 2nd. And then as you move to Texas, we do have some limited coverage of D3, extreme drought in the western and central part of the state. Overall, that covers just over 5% of Texas.
I'm Ron Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. In today's National Spotlight, we talked about drought earlier, but rain continues in Iowa, and the state has less and less dryness as a result. Riley Smith has more.
Iowa State climatologist Dr. Justin Glisson said that weather pattern is likely to continue for a while as well.
We saw removal of D0 conditions, that abnormally dry condition, across parts of northeastern Iowa and then around the existing D0 region. So we're continuing to chip away at those D0 portions of the state. Particularly, you look at southeastern Iowa, missed out on a lot of those above average May and early June rainfalls. So we're monitoring down that way for 30 to 60 day dryness. But if you look at the short-term outlooks, we are seeing an elevated wet signal for much of the upper Midwest, including Iowa. So we could see removal of that D0 across southeastern Iowa if we do see those projected rainfalls anywhere from 1 inch to 3 inches possible.
Northwest Iowa has seen the worst of the excessive rainfall by far as river flooding has pummeled the region. Unfortunately, Glisson said the upcoming weather won't provide much relief.
Yep, so if you look across the Northwest, we're looking at particular basins and rivers here. So the Big Sioux River, the Little Sioux River, and then the West Fork of the Des Moines River at Esterville. Major flooding, some flood levels, rivers cresting at levels above 1993, so record levels, particularly on that Big Sioux River, anywhere from 8 to 10 feet above the record level. So that just shows you how much water has fallen. And you look at the large-scale setup in the atmosphere. This is the Ring of Fire set up with the heat dome across the East Coast. You're basically focusing disturbances along the ridge, and that ridge exists right along the Missouri or the Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota border.
Glisson said the flood water is very dirty since it has been literally everywhere, so it poses a biohazard risk on top of being an unforgiving force of nature.
Number one, this water's dirty. It's been, through towns. It's been through places where it shouldn't be, water treatment plants. So we have to think about human health, animal health as well, with the particulate and other biohazards that are in the water. But also, floodwaters aren't safe. Flash flooding, driving through standing water, you don't know how deep that water is, so it can easily wash cars off the roadway. So those are the examples that we think of. Also, you think of Spencer, natural gas was out, electricity was out. You need to go somewhere where you can find suitable living conditions, especially those early days we had a lot of heat around.
Due to the sudden and powerful effects of flooding, Glisson said it's incredibly important to stay weather aware and keep emergency kits ready.
So luckily, a lot of shelters opened up in northwestern Iowa. We had a situation in which sirens had to be turned on to alert people of impending flooding. So it's always good to be weather aware of what's happening, but sometimes you're caught by surprise. So you always, again, we talk about the to-go bag for any kind of situation, whether it's a tornado damages your house and you have to get out of it, have flashlights, batteries, have your shoes where you can reach them or have them on, a to-go bag with food, water, clothing, things for your pets, things for your young children if you have them. Just be prepared for any situation. So having that to-go bag is always a good thing.
That again was the state climatologist for Iowa, Dr. Justin Glisson. I'm Riley Smith reporting.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's the livestock report. Wet weather can cause problems for cattle producers. Here's David Geiger.
There has been a lot of rain at the start of the summer, and after several dry years, ISU Extension Beef Program Specialist Chris Clark says producers should remember to watch out for foot rot in their herds.
Foot rot's just a bacterial infection of the foot. Kind of comes up sporadically just here and there regardless of the weather, but there's a greater risk when we have prolonged wet conditions.
Which is a prolonged risk factor. Clark says examples are deep mud and standing water. If cattle stand in it too long, the skin will soften and thin.
That bacteria is just pretty ubiquitous in the environment, and it won't enter intact skin very well, but when the skin gets thin and wet, and then the other thing is when we have drying that makes the ground kind of rough, and you get some lesions as they kind of step on that rough ground.
Clark adds pen maintenance is a key factor in keeping your animal safe by keeping it level, ensuring good footing, and scraping pens and aprons.
For cow-calf producers, they may want to get cattle up out of the lowland pastures, up out of the bottom ground until it dries out a bit. We may want to take a look at high-traffic areas, whether they be around mineral feeders, around waterers, if we have any cattle paths, anything that might be just kind of chronically muddy and wet. We want to try to alleviate that as much as we can, minimize the traffic on it. Sometimes bedding can help.
Something else to note, Clark adds, is during hot conditions to make sure to keep cattle fenced out of ponds, instead providing them shade and fresh water. I'm David Geiger reporting.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with a preview of what you'll hear today on AgNet West, here's Brian German.
New biostimulants are continuing to become available to help growers with a variety of issues. In the latest Making Sense of Biologicals episode, Director of Research and Development for Acadian Plant Health, Holly Little explains how biostimulants can help with abiotic stress.
So typically surrounding drought, heat, cold, salinity, various things that we would classify as oxidative stresses that have actually some similar damage that they cause within the plant, and that the plants have some similar natural defense mechanisms that they use to defend against those stresses. And so what we see with the use of our seaweed extract-based biostimulants is that they can help the plant be better prepared for those stresses when they come on.
And to listen to the full version of this Making Sense of Biologicals episode, head to agnetwest.com. A study from Purdue University takes a closer look at trends in the agricultural labor market. Between 2020 and 2025, about 59,400 ag jobs are expected to open annually. Job seekers are prioritizing factors like salary, location, and benefits when looking for jobs. Analyzing the job market shows that salary is the most important factor for between 61 and 67% of job seekers. The study uses Google Jobs data collected every 4 weeks since June 2021 to track ag job trends in the U.S. The study showed that the average posted salary has seen variations, with peaks in the summer months and an overall increase from 2022 to 2023. The average salary in January 2024 was approximately $53,600. These trends reflect the ag job market's changes over time, influenced by factors like post-pandemic recovery. Lawmakers are pushing back against federal agencies following a Supreme Court decision that ended Chevron deference. The legal principle previously allowed federal agencies to interpret laws broadly. The recent decision limits the power of those agencies, which many lawmakers view as a necessary step to curb overreach. The committees overseeing various agencies, including the USDA, U.S. Forest Service, EPA, and Department of Labor, have requested lists of existing and pending regulations that were upheld or could be defended under Chevron deference. Letters were sent to more than a dozen federal agencies calling for a reassessment of regulations that have significant economic impacts, with the aim of reducing unnecessary governmental overreach and ensuring that agencies operate within the constraints set by Congress. The lawmakers argued that the expansive administrative state fostered by Chevron deference has undermined democratic processes and imposed undue burdens on citizens. Ag employers are consistently working to overcome labor shortages and increasing costs. Assistant professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at UC Berkeley, Allie Hill, said navigating labor challenges will likely require implementing a portfolio of options.
There's kind of a portfolio of options, and employers are likely going to use some combination of these things. So you can find ways to recruit new workers. So a lot of employers are pushing for immigration reform. There's the Farm Workforce Modernization Act still being considered and revised, and there's the H-2A program. So both of those would serve to essentially create an avenue for getting more workers into the farm workforce. I think those are both kind of temporary solutions, because the other presentation in the AgriPulse Summit with me was really highlighting just a decreasing pool of available workers from countries that we've historically gotten our farm workforce from, just due to general demographic shifts. But those things would help the ag industry in this kind of transition to less and less reliance on manual workers. And so then we get into more mechanization solutions. So there's machine assist technology, which is really geared towards increasing employee productivity. So we'll replace some workers, but really the end goal there is to make the workers that are still in the farm workforce more productive, which means that you can then afford to pay them more. There's also full automation, which would be fully replacing some tasks. And then there's just outside of the labor pool, you could also cut some other costs using mechanization and AI technology. So reducing costs for irrigation, for example, can then free up some more money to pay workers more.
Registration is open for the 2024 Irrigation Show and Education Week happening in Long Beach in November. Hosted by the Irrigation Association, the Irrigation Show and Education Week will be taking place November 4th through the 7th at the Long Beach Convention and Entertainment Center. The show provides the industry's most comprehensive list of education offerings, hands-on access to the latest products and technologies, and the opportunity to network with industry peers and find new suppliers. The popular New Product Contest will be back again this year, bringing the newest irrigation technology directly to the show floor. Registration is also open for the IA University courses that will be offered during the show, which will include 5 new courses for attendees. Registration information and a breakdown of the complete schedule of events can be found at irrigation.org/2024 show. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
There's more good news on the food price front. That's coming up on This Line of Ours.
I'm fairly confident that we're headed in the right direction.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack's reaction Thursday after looking at the latest Consumer Food Price Index report showing another month of zero grocery store food price inflation. USDA economist Megan Schweitzer told us.
So this month in particular, we saw food at home prices were flat over the month. And in fact, food at home prices have been flat for 3 out of the 4 most recent months.
And Ag Secretary Vilsack told reporters compared to prices 1 year ago.
The grocery store cost of food is now at an inflation rate of a little over 1%, which is well below the 20-year average.
Gary Crawford reporting.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. We go to Cindy Zimmerman now with the ethanol report and an in-depth look at California and ethanol.
I'm Cindy Zimmerman. California is the only state in the country that bans the sale of 15% ethanol, or E15. It's also the state which consistently has the highest gas prices in the nation. Just allowing E15 to be sold could make a big difference, according to a new study just released from the Renewable Fuels Association by economists at UC Berkeley and the U.S. Naval Academy. I'm talking with RFA's chief economist, Scott Richmond. So what I'd like you to do, Scott, is tell us about this study and what it showed.
Right. So California is actually the only state in the U.S. where E15 is not yet approved for sale. And California is also pretty well known for having some high gasoline prices. And so intuitively, we know that E15 in other parts of the country tends to be lower priced than regular unleaded gasoline, and it's likely to bring some relief to California consumers. So what we did was we asked David Zilberman, who is very well known in biofuel economic circles, and his research partner, Scott Kaplan, to take a look at what would the savings be if California were to allow E15 for sale, and if E15 were sold throughout California, what could be the savings for consumers? So they did an interesting study, and what they came up with was that E15 would save California consumers 20 cents per gallon. So that's a substantial amount, and that's after accounting for a little bit lower fuel economy, a little over 1% lower fuel economy for E15 versus regular unleaded, which is E10. And if E15 were to get adopted throughout California, California uses about 10% of the gasoline for the entire country. And if E15 were to get adopted throughout the entire state, consumers would save about $2.7 billion. So that's about $200 per household there. And interestingly as well, because the burden of fuel costs falls most heavily on low-income households, it would be low-income households that benefit the most from this. So what the study did was really substantiate from an economic perspective why it's a good idea for the state of California to go ahead and allow E15 for sale.
What is RFA going to do with the results of this study?
So RFA has actually been doing a lot for a few years now, trying to get E15 approved for sale in California. Most importantly, we helped undertake a very rigorous testing program because the state of California is known for its environmental regulations, and we had to show that E15, in terms of emissions from vehicles, is basically either equal to or better than regular unleaded gasoline for performance. So we have already checked that box. That was a very rigorous and expensive undertaking. So we have engaged with the state of California on that, and we're also engaging with them just on their overall approval process. And this is really one more piece of evidence that we can lay in front of them to make the case for E15. California has a low carbon fuel standard. It was really the first in the country. They're very, very well known for that. E15 reduces greenhouse gas emissions relative to standard unleaded gasoline. And so what we've tried to do is make the case to them that in terms of vehicle emissions, E15 is the same or better than the standard E10 that's available. From a greenhouse gas emission standpoint, it's better, and it's going to help them reduce GHG emissions under the low carbon fuel standard even more. And additionally, it's better from an economic perspective. So it really checks multiple boxes for California. So they've been a little bit preoccupied with adopting amendments to their low carbon fuel standard, but we think they can do multiple things at one time, and there are really compelling reasons for going ahead and allowing E15 at the same time that they move to the next phase of their LCFS.
Obviously, higher gasoline prices in California are concerning consumers. And if this could save California consumers $2.7 billion annually, but if I was a California consumer, that number would not necessarily mean anything to me personally. What could you say to a California consumer personally about what E15 could mean to them?
Well, I know that just about any consumer, if they went to the pump, and the pump price would be even better than this, but they knew that adjusted for fuel economy, they were going to save 20 cents per gallon on every gallon they pumped. They were going to save their household was going to save $200 per year. I think that's attractive to anybody. And it might be particularly attractive in California, given the high gasoline prices out there, as well as California is also famous for the commutes out there and the interstates and the amount of driving that people do. So if there's any state in the country that ought to approve and encourage E15, given the level of gasoline prices, given the existence of the low carbon fuel standard, given the amount of driving that people do out there, and also given the increased focus out there versus other states about environmental justice, California ought to be the state that's really out there, not just approving, but promoting E15.
We will return with Cindy Zimmerman right after this. We continue now with Cindy Zimmerman of Zimcom Media and the Ethanol Report.
Well, as far as the fact that California is the only state left. So this study, though, tells California that essentially, if they want to lower gas prices, this is the easiest way for them to do that. Is that what you're saying?
It really is. You can't control the global oil market. You can't, control how many refiners are serving the state, things like that. But E15 has been proven to reduce gasoline prices and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions under their low carbon fuel standard. So it's pretty much a no-brainer. It's it's a solution that's just out there ready to be selected.
Well, and as like this study really deals mostly with prices, but the other information that you provided to California is the same information that every other state has used. So it's just like, what do you think it will take to convince California that they can do the same thing everybody else does?
I think there are a number of regulators and parties out in California that understand that this is a good idea to do. It's just a question of getting them out of the starting blocks, and hopefully this is one more thing that will motivate them to do that. There's only a certain amount of bandwidth and money in any state government, but I think when you see the benefits that your citizens could have from this sort of step, this is something that should be prioritized.
All right, well, now we're going to talk to RFA President and CEO Jeff Cooper to discuss a little more about the legislative and policy climate in California when it comes to getting them to a place where they're willing to listen to the facts about E15, which has been approved by EPA for use in cars older than 2001 for more than a decade now. So first of all, Jeff, why has California refused to do what all 49 other states have done?
Yeah, well, when it comes to fuels and climate policy and environmental regulations and really most things, California likes to do things its own way, and they have their own rules and regulations when it comes to approving new fuels. They have a Clean Air Act waiver, so they are not held to the same standards as the other 49 states when it comes to new fuel approvals and other emissions regulations. They have the ability given to them by EPA and Congress to do their own thing when it comes to fuels. And so that's why we're in this situation. They have their own process for analyzing new fuels and approving those fuels, and then there's a rulemaking that must happen, or at least CARB says it must happen. So that's why we are seeing California as the last remaining holdout on E15, is they have not taken all the steps necessary according to their own policies and procedures to get this fuel approved. Now, really, the big piece that of their process that has to be overcome is testing of the fuel in vehicles, and that work has actually been done. It's been done for quite some time. RFA, along with the corn growers and some other organizations, including the automakers, got together with the Air Resources Board several years ago, probably 5 years ago at this point, and said, "Hey, we'll fund with you a study of the 20 vehicles that is required, and to analyze the emissions impacts and make sure that using E15 isn't going to be worse for emissions than using today's standard gasoline, which is E10 in California." That work has all been done. All the results showed, as we expected, emissions benefits from moving from E10 to E15, significant reductions in particulate matter emissions, significant reductions in carbon monoxide, other pollutants that cause ground level ozone and smog. They're all reduced using E15. So that box has been checked for quite some time now. And so the next step is CARB, the Air Resources Board, actually initiating a rulemaking process to approve E15 as a legal fuel in the state. And for whatever reason, the agency has been dragging its feet for quite some time now in getting that process started. And they say, well, we don't have the resources, we don't have the staff, we don't have the time to do this. And our argument all along has been, look, the heavy lifting's been done. The emissions analysis has been done. The economic analysis for the most part has been done. So what are we waiting on? Let's get this thing, this rulemaking process going. Let's get it finished, and let's get E15 into the marketplace so it can start lowering fuel prices for consumers and reducing emissions of those harmful tailpipe pollutants, but also reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is a high priority for the state of California. So that's where the process stands. There have been numerous fits and starts, and again, we are hopeful that this new study coming from UC Berkeley and others is going to hopefully light a fire under the right folks at CARB and in the governor's office to get this fuel approved, get this process, get the bureaucracy, get that done, get that out of the way, and get this fuel out into the marketplace where these benefits can be realized by consumers.
You are listening to the AgNet News Hour. We conclude the ethanol report with Cindy Zimmerman.
I was looking at a study that came up when I was looking at CARB's site that was submitted by the ethanol industry in June of 2020. Is this what you were talking about, a California multimedia evaluation of E11 to E15?
That's exactly what we're talking about. That's
178 pages.
Yeah, and that's only one piece
yeah.
of what we're talking about. But they do have what's called a multimedia evaluation process that any new fuels that someone wants to introduce into the state has to go through that process. And really it looks at the impacts of the fuel on air, on soil, on water. And so the report you're talking about is one piece of that multimedia analysis. Like I said, we also had the vehicle emissions testing. There's been research submitted on, water impacts, and the California Water Board is involved in all this. So that work has all been done, all that technical work. And we jumped through all the hoops that they asked us to. And now we're sitting on this package of all this research, waiting for CARB to take the next step. And for whatever reason, they've been very slow to take it.
Okay, but E10 is sold in California, and E15, or rather E85 is sold in California. It's just because E15 is considered a different fuel.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, when you step back and think about it that way, ask the question that way, it really does, I think, shine a light on just how ridiculous this entire process is. California leads the nation in the sales of E85 by far. They also lead the nation in the sales of E10. They've been using E10 in the state of California. Almost every single gallon of gasoline in California is E10 and has been that way really since 2006 or 7. So they're familiar with ethanol blends. They're familiar with the emissions profile of ethanol and what happens when you blend it at different levels. And anything that E10 does in terms of reducing emissions, E15 does even better. And their own research shows that. So there's no reason whatsoever that we should be held to this. It's not like we're introducing an entirely new liquid fuel that nobody's ever tested or has any experience with, and it's a brand new substance, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about fuels that the regulators and the marketplace in California are well familiar with. We're just talking about, hey, there's a little more ethanol in this version of gasoline. So it has been quite frustrating for us the last 5-6 years, and that's why we are doing everything we can to try and get more momentum and more support behind getting this process initiated to approve the fuel.
As far as the use of ethanol in fuel in California, does it still have to meet certain standards that at one time was only sugarcane ethanol was able to meet?
Well, so they have a couple different things going on that influence how ethanol is used in California. First, they have what's called the California Reformulated Gasoline Program. And that's focused on tailpipe emissions of things like carbon monoxide and NOx and particulate matter and those pollutants that cause ground level ozone and smog. And so they adopted the California RFG program years ago. That led to the introduction of E10 into the marketplace. We've seen the positive impact that has had on reducing smog in California, especially in Southern California. And then in addition to that program, they have their low carbon fuel standard, right, which requires fuel suppliers to reduce the carbon intensity of fuels that they are distributing into the marketplace. Well, ethanol helps there as well, right? And we've seen ethanol viewed very favorably by regulated parties under the LCFS as a way of reducing carbon intensity. You're right that in the past, CARB has said, well, sugarcane ethanol from Brazil is lower carbon than corn ethanol from Nebraska or Iowa or South Dakota. And therefore, the marketplace should be prioritizing the use of Brazilian sugarcane ethanol. Well, that really hasn't happened. I mean, we've seen, California import some sugarcane ethanol from Brazil over the years, but it just hasn't been economically competitive. And so, by and large, the California marketplace has relied on corn ethanol produced in the Midwest to help meet their California RFG requirements and also their low carbon fuel standard requirements. One other point that we've been making is allowing E15 would actually help, refiners and fuel distributors and others meet increasingly stringent low carbon fuel standards moving forward. Because if you're adding more ethanol, if you're at 15% ethanol, now you're getting a greater carbon reduction. So that's another way that E15 would help the state achieve its policy goals.
Well, obviously, CARB is the gatekeeper as far as getting E15 into the state for sale. Are you seeing any kind of softening in the attitude of CARB towards E15 that might make that possible?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're in communication with CARB all the time. They were very involved, obviously, in the multimedia evaluation process, the emissions testing. And so now we have been encouraging the agency to get started on this rulemaking. I think what it boils down to, Cindy, is they've got a lot of other priorities that come ahead of E15, right? And a lot of those priorities have to do with electrification and their Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule and sort of forcing EVs into the marketplace. So E15 falls quite a bit lower on that priority list. But what we're seeing happen recently is there is growing, there's always lots of attention on gas prices in California, but there's been probably more than ever in recent years, attention on how high California's gas prices are compared to the rest of the country. Today, on this very day, AAA says the average gas price in California is $4.77 a gallon, right? I think I paid $3.20 a gallon when I filled up the other day here in St. Louis. So there is more and more attention and more focus, not just from CARB, but from the California Energy Commission, from the governor's office, from the assembly, on how can we get fuel prices down in this state and how can we provide some relief to consumers. And we've been saying E15 is a way to do that. And by the way, it also would meet and help achieve the goals of several CARB programs related to air quality and emissions.
Thank you again to Cindy Zimmerman and Zimcom Media for the Ethanol Report. That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.